In this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about SQL views. Like we've got our app user table with our name and the ID and all that information. Then we have the settings table, which just goes by user ID and the setting name and the information. But if you don't know who the user ID is, this user ID is not going to do you much good when you have a whole lot of records. So one solution is to create a view of these two tables sort of combined. So let's start on that. You can kind of start off just doing a query, and then you can convert it into a view that's going to stay in the database. So we're going to do that. So let's say select ID, user name, first name, last name, from, we're going to say app user. And then if we click go, we should get a list of that. We get these 4 people. Although 2 of these are deleted, so we're going to say where is deleted equals 0. You know, we did some of those commands in our app program, and it's the same thing other than you're doing it through the query window. Okay, so we've got the username and the first and last name. Well, let's say that we do the same thing with, we're just gonna right click, copy that to save me some typing, and a new query window. And this time I want to select the app settings. So I'll say ID, user ID, setting name, and setting value. We're not going to do blob value because we can't see that on the screen. And this would be from app user settings, where is deleted is 0, which they should all, none of them should be 0. I mean, none of them should be. Okay, didn't like it, what I did. Invalid column name, user ID, didn't like that. And didn't like setting value. And let's see, boy, I just missed every single one of those. So now we have the settings table. But we need them to be all in one line. Like we need this name here so that we can see this. So what we do is we would join, we could start with either table. We could start, well, we're going to do it both ways. We'll start with the app user settings. So we've got app user settings, and we're going to add the name to it. So let's do another comma, and we'll say a username and first name, last name. And then we're going to join, and just the plain join, if you don't use any prefix to it, is just going to mean they have to all be there. So we'll say join MFG, no, wrong thing, app user on ID equals user ID. Well, if you can see, it does not like this. What the problem is, these both have an ID field, so that's not going to work. So what we can do is just give it a little alias, like we'll say user settings. We could use give it a name instead of app user settings of settings. And I just call it that. You could say S1, you could say S, you could say anything you want, but settings is pretty good. So we'll say settings. And you don't, all these ones that are not in both tables, You do not have to put the settings in front of it, but I kind of like to. That lets you know which table it's in case you don't have them memorized. And then we would say app user, we call that user. And then this would be join app user on user ID equals settings user ID. And there's something I did wrong. It says join app user, maybe we'll say USR. Yeah, that's better. Where settings is equal deleted, and on the user we'll say where the settings user ID equals user ID and USR is deleted equals 0. So let's, instead of this username and first name and last name, even though that's not in both tables, just to sort of keep it in the right convention, let's go ahead and prefix it. User. And you can use the whole big table name if you want to too, but you can run into some long table names, and so I like using a little shortcut. So let's click run and see what we get. Didn't like none of that. So we'll say join app user on user ID equals settings user ID, and users is deleted. I did the wrong thing. Equals 0. So now we've got a view with the, now this is the setting ID, and I'll show you something else on that. And we've got the user ID, and we have the setting name and setting value and the rest of it. What you could do on this ID so that you're not just confused, wondering, well, which ID field is it? Because you may have forgotten that the user ID is ID of this. We could say settings ID. We could say like settings.id as setting ID, and it will change our column header. So that's how you would create a view that way. Now if you wanted to start with the user and then join the settings, I'll show you how you do it. Right click. I'm just going to copy this so it'll be less typing. And I'll open a new query window. So if we wanted to, we can still keep them in this order. It doesn't really matter. But what we would do was, instead of starting with the user settings, it would start with the app user, and that means it would grab an app user record and then go looking for each setting record. Whereas this one started, it went through all the setting records and then it went and looked for an app, a user that was not deleted. So let's do it the reverse this way. We'll say app user. So we're selecting from app user where user is delete equals 0, and then we're going to join. Now that would mean that you had to have a setting record or it would not come up with anything, and we're going to do this both ways. So we'll say app user settings on settings user ID. Well, I can just copy this. There we go. And we'll say and settings is deleted equals 0. And you could also put the settings down in the where command at the bottom, but I like doing it on the join. Now this one here is only going to show us users that have settings. Okay, so let's click run. And this is pretty much the same one as the other one. But let's say that we wanted to show the users whether they had settings or not. So then we could use a left join. And what that would do, it would take the left record, which is F user, and it would take, if it found any settings, which is the right hand, it would take those, but even if it didn't, it would just give it no. And that comes in handy a lot. So we do a left join. So now you can see we've got the user ID name. And another thing that we can do, instead of saying settings user ID, we could say user ID. That way we have the user ID whether we found a settings or not. So let's do it this way. ID. Okay. And then we'll give him an alias name too, as user ID, so it's not confusing. Okay, so we've got this Donnie Osmond, and I spelled his name wrong. It's O-N-D, but we'll fix that. And he doesn't have any settings, only Cindy does. And so we've gone both ways. Now let's decide that we want to save this in the database as a view. What I like to do is, let's take like one of these tables, like F user table, right click, script, create to new query window. And I kind of like to strip a lot of this out. And I'm going to say create, I'm going to script this out. And we're going to say create view. And then you would just copy your code in here. Hope I have the syntax right. Let's see. I think that's what we... You didn't like that. Hold on. I'm going to look that up real quick and I'm going to get back with you, okay? I'm going to pause it. Okay, I'm back. I went to my favorite site, W3 Schools, and I was remiss in giving it a view name. So let's give this a name real quick. So create view, a lot of people use, you can call it anything you want. Some people like V underscore and a new name, and that's fine with me. I don't care. But you can call it anything you want. We'll say user settings. And so let's see if this will work after we check it again. Yep, there's the word add. Did I delete that out? As. Let's see if the errors come out. So let's click go. And then when we pull up views, hopefully it'll be there without refreshing. There we go. We can right click and select. Okay, so this video is getting kind of long, so we're going to close this lesson, and the next one we'll look at using this in our program, okay?